I'm not sure how we can do justice to the life of a man who lived nearly a century. Douglas Allen Rozelle's 94 years represent more than one-third of the history of our United States. There is a lot to tell. Three things easily stand out. He was an accomplished and highly respected educator, a daring sportsman, and a man committed to his family. Our freshest memories of Doug are in his latter years when he was slower to move around, frustrated by computers and cell phones, and hesitant to travel. But today we want to tell you primarily about the younger man and his high-achieving life. Doug was born January 18, 1930, in Huntington Park, California. When Doug was 2 years old, his grandfather Charles Whaley died. After Grandpa's 6 children met, they decided the youngest daughter, Helen, and her husband Mike Rozelle should move into the old homestead to care for their mom Dora and the small farm. Those were Doug's parents. The home was in Clearwater, California, which later changed its name to Paramount. Grandpa Charles had served on the Clearwater School Board, which included the elementary school diagonally across the street from the family home. For the Rozelle family to come back to Paramount led to a remarkable 47 years that Doug spent in the Paramount School District as a student, a teacher, and an administrator. It would not be overly dramatic to call him Mr. Paramount. Doug was born less than 3 months after the Wall Street stock market crash that brought on the Great Depression. The day he was born, his dad got laid off from his job. Doug, the younger brother, and Lee struggled through the Depression the first 11 years of Doug's life, and it only ended when World War II began, bringing another era of shortages, uncertainty, and sacrifice. When Doug was 3 years old, the devastating Long Beach earthquake struck the area. 120 people died and over 150 schools were damaged or destroyed. The bell tower on the school across the street crashed to the ground, and the Rozelle home was knocked off its foundation. Doug and older brother Lee had a lot of chores to help the family as they raised turkeys, sheep, rabbits, and mink. Doug rode his horse in the neighborhood and along the Los Angeles River. They also had a stubborn mule the boys tell of literally lighting a fire under it to get it to go. The family loved to tell how Doug ended up playing the trombone as a tiny 8-year-old. His arm was too short to hit the distant slide positions, so he tied a string around his wrist and threw the slide forward to hit those notes. Lee also liked to remind Doug of the day Lee was shooting his bow and arrow, and Doug ran right in front of the target. Lee shot him right in the middle of the chest, but fortunately the wound wasn't too deep. The boys' best friends growing up were cousins Dick and Pete Rozelle, the future NFL commissioner. Doug's fathers and uncles were well known for their athletic accomplishments in the Compton area, and Doug followed suit. In junior high, he played tennis as well as some basketball and football, but baseball was destined to be his passion. At Compton High School, he became a top player in the league. Then after high school, he played ball at Compton Junior College, where he led the league in RBIs and had a high batting average. At graduation, he had 2 options. He could accept a pro baseball offer that he received, or accept a college scholarship in baseball from the University of San Francisco. Doug's Uncle Joe Rozelle, who was a coach and a history teacher, advised him, "Go to college and become a teacher." So in the fall of 1949, he moved up to San Francisco, where he played baseball for 2 years. In 1951, he earned his B.S. degree. He did get married during this time, but we'll come back and talk about his family in just a bit. After graduation, he moved back to Southern California and got his teaching credential at Long Beach State. His first teaching job? You guessed it, Paramount Junior High. Then after 3 years at the junior high, he moved up to Paramount High School in 1956, where he worked for 33 years. In the 1950s, he helped establish the driver's education program using 1955 Chevys with stick shift. In 1961, he took on the role of Director of Student Activities, which he did for 12 years. He really loved and cared about those students. Comments repeatedly said he was caring and fun. How was he fun? Well, he played donkey basketball. He dressed up like a cheerleader to rally the students. He wore a pirate costume for the school mascot, the Paramount Pirates. And most notably, he even announced at a pep rally that if the team won their big game, the football coach could shave his head. Beginning in 1963, he added the role of Director of Athletics for more than a decade. He also had the honor of serving on the CIF Executive Committee for 4 years, overseeing all of high school athletics in Southern California. In 1973, he was promoted to assistant principal, and then in 1977, he became the principal, a position he held for 12 years. He really loved that school, and as principal wanted to make it a better place to learn and to teach. Water had been turned off to all the grass. There was racial gang violence. Test scores had plummeted. He tackled all these issues as principal and was widely credited for making Paramount High a better place. By 1988, Doug had accumulated over 400 days of paid sick leave and over 40 days of vacation. He decided it was time to retire, even though he was only 58 years old. He told the students, after being in the district for 47 years, it was time for him to graduate too. He estimated he had attended 300 football games, 25 proms, and over 100 dances. He had hired virtually every teacher in the school and most of the clerical staff. Everyone at the school knew he wanted to travel in his trailer and go fishing. So, after retirement, he headed across the country in his trailer. When he got to the East Coast, he got word that his father had had a stroke and was in his final days. With great sadness, he worked his way back across the country and assumed responsibility for the care of his mother, who lived another 24 years. His family has tremendous respect for him for this amazing sacrifice and vowed that we would do the same for him, and we did. Speaking of family, let's go back now and pick up the story of Doug's family. Doug met Jane Lawrence at Compton High School. She was beautiful, smart, and even athletic. So Doug dumped his girlfriend and took up with Jane. They dated several years and finally married after Doug's first semester away at San Francisco. Here is the apartment project where they lived. Later that year, their firstborn came along in the person of Kent. As the first grandchild on both sides, he captured everyone's heart. But life was tough financially. Working and playing baseball meant his grades suffered, but he did graduate in June of 1951. They then moved back to a rental in Signal Hill. Doug worked the swing shift at McDonnell Douglas and went to school days. After one very tough year, he had his teaching credential and life became a bit easier. Second child Mark came along 2 years later, so the family moved to Paramount. Doug and Jane then had their girl, Nancy, in 1955. They needed another bedroom, so this time they bought a home in North Long Beach. Their last child, Roy, came along in 1964, which prompted their move to Cyprus. The family was now complete. Dad believed in teaching us hard work from a young age. but we turned out okay. As a teacher, he expected good grades from us, and that made all of us high achievers. Doug was a good dad. He coached our baseball and softball teams. As a teacher, he took advantage of summers off to take us on some great vacations. But we have to show you one way that we kind of teased him back. On his 65th birthday, Nancy hired a belly dancer with a snake to show up at the restaurant during his celebration dinner, and his mother was there in attendance. Next, we want to tell you about Doug's daring, adventurous side. It started with skin diving. In the mid-1950s, not many people were skin diving yet. There were no wetsuits. He made his own dry suit. He dove off a homemade paddleboard that he even paddled at night all the way to the Long Beach breakwater to catch lobster by flashlight. He gathered abalone, scallops, and lobster, and speared halibut, bass, and barracuda. Family vacations to Refugio Beach centered on him skin diving. We kids were in awe of our dad coming out of the water with a stringer full of fish. He took this daring to the next level when he decided in 1958 to go diving and fishing in Baja, Mexico. He went with his brother-in-law David and Paramount High School student body president John Baird. They pulled John's father's boat behind Doug's 1951 Ford. One night a huge wind came up and blew the boat out to sea. When they returned, they had to tell John's dad they lost his boat. Doug and his friend Bob Morris went back to Baja several more times. On one trip, they decided to explore the remote peninsula on their tiny Honda Trail 90 motorcycles, a crazy but exciting challenge. Over time, Doug outgrew the Honda 90 and bought bigger and better bikes. Vacations moved from the ocean to the desert, where Doug explored thousands of miles of the Southern California backcountry with friends and family. Doug loved to hunt. While he was still teaching, he could only bird hunt, but after retirement, he continued generations of tradition by taking his own bucks. Probably the longest-standing passion for Doug was fishing. He fished in lakes and rivers, but especially in the ocean. He caught everything from trout to tuna. When his father-in-law died in 1980, he inherited a small old boat named the Gale that he spent many hours in on the sea. His crowning achievement came in 1994 when he caught a huge marlin and landed it in the Gale. It's interesting how Doug's evolving interest inspired each of his children with a different one of his passions. Kent followed him as a college baseball player and coach, and is a passionate fisherman. Mark took spearfishing and big game hunting to a whole new level, and today he enjoys RVing. Nancy played softball for 14 years and has spent hundreds of weekends camping in the desert with off-road vehicles. Roy became an accomplished desert motorcycle racer and still travels hundreds of miles a year in remote countryside. Of course, Doug's family has expanded. His 4 children have given him 10 grandchildren, and so far 7 great-grandchildren. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to show them all. Through them, Doug's loving, high-achieving, adventurous, family-devoted nature will continue for generations to come. Since Jane passed, Doug has been alone for the first time in his life. But he has enjoyed his friends and neighbors. He looked forward to his Wednesday lunch with the boys. He also enjoyed his animals, his consecutive dogs, his tortoise Sherman that outlived his mother and him, his birds that he overfed on the bird feeder, and the squirrels that knew he would throw them a handful of peanuts every day. He also had his Dodgers. He watched every game and had no shortage of opinions on their performance. For his 4 children, it has been a wonderful 2 years to get to know our dad as an individual, not as interpreted by Jane or with Jane in the middle. They have been wonderful years, maybe even the best years. We would never want to trade them. Dad passed suddenly and surprisingly in the hospital. We were waiting for a surgery we thought would give him more years. He was feeling rather well, and then he just was suddenly gone. It was fitting that he was watching baseball on the TV when he finally slid into home plate. Dad, you left a lot of people who love you, and will miss you as you ride off into the sunset.